Who asked you to play God? Every damn patient that comes through that door. No!
Are you took your notes and everything as far as what you want to talk about?
Yeah, surprisingly so. I mean, I had some ideas running in my head after the first time I watched it.
Okay.
And this morning I woke up and I started watching it again. And then I had all these other thoughts kind of connect to the themes that were coming up in the show.
Okay.
So that's why I was a little late in getting prepped today. But I'm glad it worked out. Hopefully it won't be as lost as like last time and you won't have to like reel me back in, because that was a mess.
It's understandable. You've been away from it for a while, so.
You know, but like I said last time, the idea of media therapy and trying to derive something is really hard, especially when you're trying to derive something and make it so personal to you, because we naturally sort of in some ways do it, but then to put it out there, like, and put it in the forefront of your mind and be so cognizant of that is a completely different story. A lot of people watch shows and TV and, you know, they'll have a reaction or some sort of response that makes them, like, you know, have all these different emotional responses to what they're experiencing, right? But oftentimes they don't even know why. They just know they blame the victim, or they blame the characters, or they give praise to the characters, but they don't really pull that in and say, hey, you know what? This touches upon something that feels personal to me. Mm-hmm. And that connection, I think, is the leap that I find difficult, even for myself and for someone who has a lot of self-awareness in that capacity, but being able to do it through the lens of media, because you still want to watch it through, you know, behind a wall. You still want to like keep yourself disconnected from the characters and say, well, that's their problem, right? It has nothing to do with me and it's not my problem, although it is your problem too. You know, so that's hard. Hi everyone and welcome back. Here I am, back again. Episode 10, Believers. All right, so this time I'm not going to start off by saying I don't know what I want to talk about, because I actually do know what I want to talk about. This show, oh man, from the very beginning, Dr. Franklin hit every node, every nerve in my body to make me feel cringe. Cringe? I felt cringed. Cringe?
Cringed?
There was a lot of cringe. I felt cringed. So there was...
Well, cringe is very specific, right? They actually did some studies on this. Are you cringe? Yeah. Cringe is both internal and external.
Between compassionate cringe and contemptuous cringe. Compassionate cringe involves an emotional identification with the person you're cringing at. Even if they aren't embarrassed themselves in the cringeworthy moment, you still feel the embarrassment they would feel, or perhaps ought to feel, if they were aware of how other people were perceiving them. Contemptuous cringe, on the other hand, involves an emotional distancing from the person you're cringing at. Just like with compassionate cringe, you perceive that the person is embarrassing themselves, but instead of feeling embarrassment on their behalf, you feel annoyance and disgust at them, and maybe even a little 𝘭𝘓𝘓𝘓. So these are actually two very different emotional responses: vicarious embarrassment versus contempt. We call both feelings cringe, not because they're similar feelings, but because they're responses to the same type of situation. People lacking self-awareness, embarrassing themselves without realizing it. Now, embarrassment and contempt seem, at face value, like pretty unpleasant feelings. So why are we so fascinated by content that makes us feel this way? Why do these cringe subreddits have more than 1 million members? Why are cringe compilations and cringe reaction videos so popular on YouTube? Why does so much comedy feature cringy situations? Well, I think the answer to that question depends on whether we're cringing compassionately or contemptuously.
I felt cringe because Well, I felt cringe within me because I felt he was a terrible person.
Okay.
So how do you specify that?
Again, this is very specific. ContraPoints actually has a great video on cringe and what it means.
I'll have to check it out.
Can you specify cringe for you? What does that mean? What's
So
that feeling?
I probably should have looked up the dictionary definition. What I find often is that I use words and I realize that the definitions of those words are not really what those words actually mean. So cringe to me is more of this visceral experience where I'm watching something or experiencing something and I think I get this feeling like, oh, that sits incredibly uncomfortable for me.
Okay.
That's what cringe is. It's this visceral experience. So it starts off from the very beginning, the opening. Sean is dying and the parents say to him, when he asks if he's gonna die, they say, if it's written in the streams of time, it will be so. And then Franklin says,
I'll tell you what is written in the streams of time. Very soon you will breathe much easier, and then you will grow up to be strong and wise and bring much honor to your mother and your father.
Please don't speak that way. No one knows what is written in the stream until the waters surround him.
I am never wrong about these things.
wow. There's so many problems even with just the opening line. The first problem is that he gives whatever his parents are saying to the child, he gives it absolutely no respect. And on top of that, he gives it some sort of contradictory response to a child who's already confused, who already doesn't really he doesn't have his own opinions completely formulated, let's say. I mean, he's really looking to the adults for like guidance, right, in general. But he's disrespecting the parents and like what they're, how they're speaking to their child and how they're parenting their children. Secondly, he takes the stance of knowing better than his parents do. And what gives him that authority? What allows him to say, well, I know better. I'll tell you. I'll show you. What gives him that authority? All right, so there came a point where now Maya and like the doctor are in the room talking to the parents about, their child and his inevitable outcome, that he was going to die. There's a point where Maya like talks
Maya's the assistant.
Yes.
Right? Oh.
Yeah, Maya's the assistant. Who, by the way, I want to say that she looks so short in comparison to him. And then I look up their heights and it says that she's 5'7", he's 5'10". So why was she like a whole feet like shorter than him? I don't understand. I had to look up their heights because it made no sense. There came a point in the episode, right at the beginning as well, where she's asked the parents, so you're just gonna let your child die? And they're sharing their beliefs with her, and she has her arms crossed and she's rolling their eyes at them. I don't know if you got that part, but that's what she does. She's completely dismissive of their opinion.
Her body language is...
It was so aggressive, dismissive, disrespectful, and offensive. All in like that 30-second span.
Mm-hmm.
So then at that point, right, Franklin takes her out of the room and then he says, you never insult a patient's beliefs, right? And I thought, okay, all right, well, maybe there's a little hope. We're gonna go somewhere over here, right? And it wasn't the case. He had an ulterior motive.
hell are you doing?
I was going to ask you the same thing. You never insult a patient's beliefs. You work with them. You try to understand their concerns. You give them a reason to be on your side.
And you think lying to them is going to help?
I didn't lie to them.
You know as well as I that mineral oil and microbeams won't dislodge that mass. It's rooted. That kid is going under the knife or into the freezer. Those are the only options.
Sometimes you have to heal the family before you can heal the patient. This isn't some silly superstition to them. This is real. They're not going to let it go just because you tell them to.
It's going to kill their kid.
If we insist on cutting, they will put that kid on the first star cruiser out of here, and he won't survive the first jump. I am trying to find a way to save him, Doctor. Look, these people, they're terrified, but they're just not ready to cut to the chase. So first we do a little of this, and we do a little of that.
Torturing the patient with remedies that don't work.
Until they're desperate enough to bite that damn bullet and let us do what we should have done in the first place.
Eventually, what he wanted to do, why he said that to Maya, was so then he can try to get the parents to eventually side with him and have them see his ways. And what does he say? He says, he says these people are terrified. By the way, like, how does he know that they're terrified? Are they really terrified? I never really got the impression that his parents were terrified. I think that they were sad and they were already grieving the loss of their child because they knew what was inevitable. But he kept saying that they were terrified. And then he also said that the boy was terrified. But I guess I never really sensed that. Was it just me?
No, I never got that impression either.
He was projecting so much of his own fears of not playing his role as a doctor, or not fulfilling his role as a doctor, well, in this case I want to say play as well, but I think that he was he was projecting so much of his own fears of not being able to do or fulfill his duty as a doctor, as someone who saves lives. So he kept saying that they were all terrified. But anyway, going back to what he then eventually says was to Maya is that until they are desperate enough to bite the damn bullet and let us do what we should have done in the first place. So eventually, even though he tells Maya and scolds her, well, you got to get the patients to like side with you first before you do anything, his ulterior motive in the end was self-serving. He eventually wanted to get to a place of having them change their mind. First of all, there's a huge problem with the fact that he even tries to want to do this without even like processing these emotions and the parents' belief systems and this race's religion. And he assumes that that's what he's going to accomplish. But secondly, what makes him think that he can change the belief system and the values of someone else, of another race that's held on to these values for all of their life? They've lived it, they breathed it, they believe in it. What makes him believe that he can change their value system and their belief system? With what authority? I found that was so pretentious, presumptuous, arrogant, narcissistic, and egotistical. Belief systems and values are so personal to us. What we believe in, especially if it becomes something that becomes a part of our value system, it's something that we hold on to. It becomes a guiding force in how we make decisions in the world and how we want to live our lives and the path we take. And just because he's a doctor, he felt like he takes on the authority of being able to, of believing that he would be able to change their minds. One's value system and one's beliefs don't change because someone tries to coerce them. In fact, it's called reactance theory, where when someone tries to persuade someone so forcefully to take a certain stance or change their minds or persuade them in a way that doesn't really line up with them, when it threatens their freedom, they're less likely to change their mind. But also, belief systems and values are very personal to people. It's never gonna change, especially in public. Any change that would happen because maybe they heard something, or maybe they got a piece of information that spoke to them, or made them question an ulterior way of thinking. But it never happens with coercion, or at least it shouldn't. But if it happens with coercion, then, that's basically the oppressor oppressing the victim. So Dr. Franklin continues on to be more disrespectful. He and Maya are now in the cafeteria talking. And they talk about how he gave the boy a 𝘠𝘷𝘦 egg. And he says that he wants to give the boy something to believe in. What makes him think that the boy didn't already have something to believe in? And then he insults the boy's intelligence. He has no clue, really, what the boy wants. I don't even think that Dr. Franklin even ever asked Sean what he wanted. It was Sinclair who actually had that heartfelt, really deep philosophical conversation about what life meant to him. It was never Franklin. He made all these assumptions. And then on top of that, right, he says, well, I had to give him something to believe in, right? And then on top of that, this deep philosophical question of what life is supposed to mean, life and death is supposed to mean. It really just boiled down to a steak dinner bet. That was another epitome of disrespect. If I was a child, or if I was a parent, and had I known that my doctors were talking about whether or not my life depended on whether the two doctors' stances were wrong or right, was boiled down to some sort of steak dinner, I think that would fill me with rage. It absolutely would fill me with rage that that's what my life and my belief was worth to them. So we continue on. It gets to a point where Franklin then decides, he threatens the parents to take their parental rights away. And then he goes to Sinclair and he poses this dilemma. And eventually Sinclair says, well, at first he did share his own personal beliefs, right? He says, but life has to be more than just a pulse beat. What we hold sacred gives our lives meaning. It's not just about saving a life. And like in this case, what does saving a life mean to Franklin anyway? What does saving a life mean to anyone? He keeps saying that he needs to save the child's life. But I think that's very personal too. And it depends on what the individual feels saving a life means.
Should ask for your resignation right here, right now.
You want it, it's yours.
Don't tempt me, Doctor. Who asked you to play God?
Every damn patient who comes through that door, that's who. People come to doctors because they want us to be gods. They want us to make it better, or make it not so. They want to be healed, and they come to me when their prayers aren't enough. Well, if I have to take the responsibility, then I claim the authority too. I did good, and we both know it, and no one is going to take that away.
The problem I have with that is that if I was in the position of being either the parents or Sean, and my belief system isn't about having my physical body saved through surgery, saving my life would be the preservation of my spirit, as they had talked about, for the afterlife, for the journey beyond. To them, that's what saving a life meant. But to Dr. Franklin, it meant something else, and he just could not accept it. He just couldn't. He couldn't see anything different. Here's now the ultimate problem. I mean, there's so many ultimate problems here. I don't even know how to focus. Here's now another huge problem. When Sinclair eventually took the, shared his personal stance with him, because Sinclair has a deeper meaning of life, I feel, and he knows how to respect other people's belief systems and values and religion.
Who should I believe? You, because we share the same beliefs? Or do we?
Commander, those parents are willing to see their son die because of their religion. Now, you can't expect me to sit here and do nothing. May God save us from false religion.
What makes a religion false? If any religion is right, then maybe they all have to be right. Maybe God doesn't care how you say your prayers, just as long as you say them.
What if there's no God at all?
Is that what you believe?
I believe in saving lives. Without life, the question is meaningless.
But life has to be more than just a pulse beat. What we hold sacred gives our lives meaning. What are we taking away from this child?
That's a question we can worry about after the operation.
He also understands as commander that he can't take sides because it has a lot of these other implications that could backfire and be negative. So what does Dr. Franklin do at that point? He puts Sinclair in the position of what Brené Brown actually talks about in her book, Braving the Wilderness. If you're not with me, then you're my enemy. He threatens him of the potential to lose an ally, which is himself. And I'm going to share a quote from Brené Brown's book regarding what this actually means. She says that it's one of the most effective political sorters, and 95% of the time, it's an emotional and passionate rendering of bullshit, well-intentioned or not. It's turning an emotion-driven approach into weaponizing belongingness. And it always benefits the person throwing down the gauntlet and brandishing those forced false choices. The argument is set up in a way that there's only one real option. You either side with me or you're with them. And if you're with them, then we no longer have a relationship anymore because you chose sides. And basically neutrality has no... It indicates that neutrality treads on dangerous ground. And that's exactly the kind of position that Dr. Franklin puts him in. He ultimately decides to do the surgery on the boy. And as he's about to perform this surgery, he says a little prayer. "Oh Lord, preserve this child." But Maya called him out on it from the very beginning. As much as I don't like Maya, at least she was on point with it.
𝘠𝘓𝑝it eggs.
That boy's terrified. He needs a friend.
So you gave him a piece of industrial goo?
I gave him something to believe in. What?
You don't disapprove of superstition, if it's your superstition.
Now, what is that supposed to mean?
They worship the great egg, your god is medicine, and you can do no wrong in his service. What's the difference?
I produce measurable, testable results. What's your point?
Did you see their eyes? They're terrified. You didn't solve anything, you just postponed it.
I gave them a chance to think about it, to reconsider.
You are so certain, aren't you?
He had the parents come in. He called the parents in. No, actually that's when Maya called him. Maya said, well, you better come to MedLab, you and Sinclair both, the commander both. They go down there, and the parents are there, and The parents are actually saying to him that if they could forgive him, they would. They know that he meant them no harm. That he was just basically trying to do his best in what he thought was the best approach. Another huge problem I have with this is that ultimately they're the victims. Ultimately, they're the victims. He completely disrespected them. And then in the end, they're the ones willing to say that they're going to forgive him for something that he had absolutely no authority to do. The fact that Dr. Franklin put them in that position to some degree, it makes me feel ill. And it's because, one, he made them victims. He turned them into victims because of his own choosing. He took away their freedom. He took away their parental rights. He devalued their belief system. And in the end, they're the ones basically apologizing. I'm holding my breath. I'm not even like breathing here. You know, I too in my life have not been perfect. I too in my life have been very short on my forethought. So I too have, especially in my younger years when I didn't know any better, I too have placed people in positions where they shouldn't have been. And when I think back and reflect on it, it makes me feel ill. In the sense that since now I know better, since now I have the capacity to understand at a few different levels than just the one where I only sort of saw myself as very similarly to like the way Dr. Franklin did. Very tunnel vision, what he thought and believed was right. I've had those moments too, and most people typically do until they come to realize that, you know, they've made a mistake or they hurt someone. But that comes with a lot of not having thought through other people's feelings and considering what they value and disregarding that as well. So I can certainly admit that I've had my fair share of those mistakes in my life. The unfortunate thing, though, for Dr. Franklin is this, that even till the very end, when I thought that he may have actually learned from his mistake, he didn't. Even at the very end, when he's having this conversation with Sinclair, what does he say? I have to refer to my notes. He admits that he was arrogant. But then he says maybe we'd all be better off if there was no God. If God had never been invented, then we wouldn't have to be anything. There's a problem with that. There's a huge problem with that. In the end, what he ends up doing was, instead of assuming responsibility for the actions he's taken, instead he blames it on the existence of something that he, again, has no control over. He, again, has no authority over. He, again, has no say in. Who is he to say that we're not allowed to believe in things, and we're not allowed to have values and live according to the values that we have. So instead of taking responsibility for the actions he's taken, that ultimately led to Sean's death anyway, but in a matter that was actually even more humane, because then now he placed the parents in the position of having blood on their hands instead of this natural passing. And when I just thought that he could have learned a certain lesson, he didn't. He inherently said that it would have been better if we didn't have anything to believe in at all.
Except him.
And ironically, except him. That the only person who could ever have any belief in anything is the one that can play God. They're waiting, so then eventually they can say, I told you so. They're waiting. They're waiting because one of the comments the doctor said to me was, eventually, you're going to need it. Which is so defeatist, especially because I'm not just talking about some sort of fragile hope in my well-being either, or getting better. But they're waiting because in the end, it's about their own ego. It's about what they believe. It's about them believing that their science was more superior than the science and literature of the other people's science. Even though the studies and controls and, you know, the double-blind studies, they're all documented. But they're waiting. God. When he revived that child and like how cocky Dr. Franklin is, standing around with his arms crossed, yep, with a huge smile on his face.
I'm waiting for an apology.
You better check the temperature in hell first.
I mean, you ultimately disrespected them. Like, how can you not see that? And like, again, at the end, he didn't come around to believe. He didn't come around to thinking like that the number one issue here was that he didn't consider the feelings of someone else. And he didn't respect their own opinions and judgments of something. He never understood that. He never came around to understand that. And then in the end, he just wallowed in his own sorrow. Because I think eventually he was sad that the boy died. Not so much that he's done so wrong, especially to that race of people and that family. Okay. So because Dr. Franklin put, you know, the parents in this position of like wanting to strip away their parental authority, and then they went to Sinclair to like look for an advocate to help them. They go around and talk to everyone to see if there could be someone who can help them. Instead of being able to use that time to spend with their dying child, they went around spending all their time and effort into trying to be able to enforce their own parental authority. And that's sad. That's so tragic for me. It reminds me of so many different cases that I've had working at a nursing home where where people's loved ones who have ulterior motives for keeping someone alive. And instead of spending quality time with them and allowing their loved one to pass peacefully, they spent all that time and energy to make sure that they ultimately got some other benefit. And when time came and their loved one passed, they regretted that they didn't spend that extra time with them. Their hindsight was filled with regret. Okay, more hypocrisy. So eventually, the parents end up talking to 𝘸𝘀, right? And 𝘸𝘀 is actually, what she tells him, I thought was enlightening. I just have to, this show made no sense to me. This episode made no sense to me because it was just hypocrisy on top of hypocrisy, and they were just contradicting themselves constantly. And they were just offending not only themselves but each other, and I don't even know, like I felt all over the place. Like, I mean, who's offending who at this point? So when the parents went to 𝘸𝘀 and they're looking for someone to represent them.
We cannot sleep, we cannot eat. We can no longer focus our thoughts for our daily meditations. We are consumed by this. And no one listens. No one hears.
I cannot tell you how much all this troubles me.
Then you will help us.
We, 𝘤𝘠𝘠, have our own relationship with the larger domains of the universe. Matters of the soul are very private, very personal to us. We have suffered the interference of others in this area, and are thus ourselves forbidden to intervene in matters such as this.
You are refusing because of your beliefs?
We thought the 𝘤𝘠𝘠 were the most intelligent of all races.
Here are these parents demanding and asking and begging and pleading for their opinions to matter, for their religion to be valued, or just at least respected, right? And then he goes on to talk to one of the most spiritual races of all, right? To talk about the afterlife and like what the spirit and soul means and all this stuff, right? And she understands this. But then he goes on to insult her and shame her and her own race. That made no sense to me. If you're in the position of wanting to be heard, you don't then go around and insult other people who have the same stance as you do. That was another one of those moments where I was like, what? How does this make any sense? You are refusing because of your beliefs. Made no sense. I can't anymore with Dr. Franklin. Look, Dr. Franklin, I really wanted to like you, but
No.
you're not giving me much of a choice. You're making it very hard for me to stay sympathetic or even like want to take a part of your side. But you can't do that when you're inherently hurting other people. There are a lot of dilemmas and difficult circumstances out there and controversial, but that's not my place. The only thing I just want to address that there could have been much more sensitivity and respect and consideration from Dr. Franklin. And that's it. I should have respected and considered their stance. And even done the research before saving the kid's life. before, or asking questions before he did any of that. But he never did. He never did. He never spoke to the child and asked him what was important to him. He never spoke to the parents to get a better understanding. And this is a place where he could have asked the parents, what does this mean to you? Help me understand, because I'm struggling. Because as a doctor, my job and my goal is to save people's lives. Help me understand why this is not something that you want, even though I can keep him from dying. He never asked those questions. And that's my biggest problem with Dr. Franklin. Among many other things, but I already said that.
If it were your child, or even you yourself, how would you feel if the doctor of Babylon 5 wanted to perform an unwelcome procedure on you?
The avalanche has already started. It is too late for the pebbles to vote.
But I thought that this was such a beautiful quote. Beautiful? I don't know if it's a beautiful quote. It's this metaphorical quote in how I understood something else. I recently watched a show with a friend, and in that show, the woman was so driven by revenge that that's all she could pursue. Even though she had the opportunity to be a great leader, even though she had this opportunity to rebuild this whole community while dealing with devastation, because she had the capacity to, she had leadership ability, she had the resources, she chose not to. She pursued her revenge, and in the end, everyone died. My friend said to me that she had absolutely no choice. That being so overcome with emotion was what made her human. That sat with me for such a long time, and then I came across this quote. To me, the avalanches are the emotions that consume us and overwhelms us. And the pebbles are those little bits and pieces of logical thinking that we can sort of insert in between, but it's not enough to be able to not be consumed by the emotions that we feel. I have experienced this time and time again, which is why I'm not so great at logical thinking when I'm overcome with emotions. My friend tells me that this is what makes us human, but I wonder though, are we then only just subjected to just being overcome by our emotions and not having more of our logical brain be able to have a bigger role in our lives? I do know, though, that once we are overcome with a certain significant emotion, it is really hard to have anything else penetrate that. Sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it takes the willingness to process and go through understanding this avalanche. So then you have maybe more pebbles to be able to stop something that's cascading over you and making you drown and become buried in it. So I wondered about that quote. I kind of thought I would like less avalanches in my life. Or maybe having the ability to not disrupt it so much, or have it come crashing down. But you know what, though? It does take practice. I've learned that it takes practice to be able to have a little more understanding of yourself by having a little more understanding of your emotions and being able to have more reasoning in between. And that takes a significant amount of practice. It's possible. I think it's possible. That's what CBT is, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy. It's about being able to think more clearly and come to not so erroneous conclusions based on emotions, because of your emotions. But yeah, Kash always has something intelligent to say. He always makes me realize something. I guess that's what the Vorlons do. They're their own Stoics. This whole episode, you know, it has an audience trying to pick a stance. But that's not what this should be about. It's not about taking a stance on like what and whether or not the boy should have lived, or if the parents are wrong, or if Dr. Franklin is right. It's not about that. It's about opening up a dialogue and what's meaningful and important to the people that are all involved. And just as Brené Brown said, the show makes you, it kind of manipulates you to take a side and take a stance. But how can you on something that's so sensitive and personal and completely not related to the people who are necessarily watching it, because they're not of that species or religion? I mean, maybe they have beliefs that are similar. I mean, the only thing I could point to is, you know, blood transfusions and Jehovah's Witnesses. And we respect that. So yeah, this is why I just had such a hard time with this episode. I don't like how it made me feel. I don't like that if I wasn't gonna take a side on a stance, that I would be wrong or then shamed or guilted into not making the right choice. It's a deep philosophical question. It's a question that's private. It's a question that's very personal. And there's no right or wrong answer to that at all. It's what's important to you and what gives you meaning. And it's more than just a pulse beat.
Our son will not survive another space trip, will he?
No, I don't think so.
Then we either accept the fragile hope you offer, or we watch our son die in pain. It is not much of a choice, is it?
Fragile hope. I want to give that credit.
Okay.
I have a piece of lint stuck to my lip here. 1 second. Beep! Alright, let me just eat it. Give me a second. Alright. Okay. Maybe I could just wash it down with some water. I don't know. Okay. I love the fact that this mother phrased it as fragile hope with the treatment of emollients. And the reason why I love that is because she understood the idea of hope alone is already fragile enough because it's passive. It's a passive desire, wish, a passive sort of even almost daydreaming without action, without plan. And I love the way that the mother phrased it as fragile because it's true. And she wasn't unrealistic about that. There, I want to give her credit for it. I think in the whole show, that mother's line, Kash's statement, and Sinclair's sensitivity were the only things that were positive for me. And the one person that should have been positive at the end, oh, disappointed. Dr. Franklin. You need therapy. But you know, that's what makes him a good doctor, though. Believe it or not, if you could get past some of that egotism and you really want to be saved, he is the doctor to go find. There is a correlation between narcissism and competency in doctors.
Yeah, you're not wrong. That's true.
I mean, but it sucks that sometimes we have to like suck it in, right? And deal with it in order to get the outcome we want.
You've made it to episode 10.
It's a miracle in many ways.
There's 22 episodes, so you're almost halfway.
It's a miracle in so many different ways. It's a miracle because this is a project that I never had consistency in doing when we first started because I didn't know what I was doing back then. I have only an inkling now. It's a miracle because we have many arguments. And we hate each other's guts.
It's just you.
No,
okay?
No, it's not. We fight a lot. But you always put me in this position of making me think more deeply, no matter what. And you always cast doubt, so I'm never sure. And in this situation, it's a good thing. Because I'm at a place of wanting to speculate as much as I can and being able to think about many different perspectives and different angles as I can in order for me to more fully understand the world. I think that's important, especially since I lived in a bubble for so long, and I still do in my own way. That's important. So even though this project is hanging on a thread, I appreciate it greatly. And for you to force me in this position of being in front of a camera, to open up my soul, talk about my own problems and admit them, it gives me a place, the space to examine myself even more. And it wouldn't happen without the exposure. So I appreciate that. That's valuable to me.
And you're helping other people. You are. Regardless of what you may think, being able to be so open and be so, vulnerable does really help other people who are experiencing similar doubts and struggles.
I hope so. And that's not fragile hope. It's a little more hope than just fragile. I hope so. Opening up is not easy, especially opening up as a professional. Like, it always casts some sort of doubt how much I should share and how much vulnerability I should show to something that is going to be widely accessible to so many different people. And I don't know what it is. Am I worried about criticism? Or am I worried about saving face? I don't really think so. I don't really think it's that so much as maybe wondering whether or not, like, I just feel like I need to value my personal space more. But that doesn't really help either. I think we learn from the different stories we hear from different people. We learn from different people's experiences. You're going to kill me for saying this, because this was another source of our fight. Mm. But by learning from other people's stories, mistakes and failures, that's when we reduce our own trials and errors. I'm not going to look at you. Don't look at me, okay? Thank you, everyone, for watching and continuing to be interested. Let's see if I could actually get to my halfway mark. That's only just 1 week from now, so 아자아자 화이팅! Bye! Was it more cohesive this time?
I thought so. The better notes you take, the more you take your time, the better off you'll be.
I was kind of on a roll this morning when I started, like, I wrote it all out.
Look at your notes, they're nice.
No, it's just dialogue, but then, you know, I mean, it's dialogue, but...
Wow.
He already had something he believed in!
Those are good. That's great.
No, but it's just dialogue, you know, because once I see the dialogue,
Yeah.
I know what it would trigger for me, you know.
Yeah.
But in this situation, there were so many things that Dr. Franklin said that like just, oh my God, I wanted to like, it was so awful.
My favorite one. Franklin is so cocky. It's an all cap, and yet you didn't utter that line at all when you were talking.
I didn't I didn't go in that order. I didn't go. I see you showed up a little early. Well, you showed up on time, really, but I was a little late and I didn't get to highlight it.
That is what you should have started the video with. Oh my God, Franklin is so cocky. that would have been it. Gonna resign or whatever. I would have fired his ass. It's such a disgusting comment to make. I would have been like, you're nuts. Get out of here.
But you see, that's what I like about Sinclair, though. You know, he doesn't just dismiss people. He tries to give people a chance. Always.